The railway station was always alive. Iron wheels grinding against tracks. Vendors shouting about tea and samosas. Children running dangerously close to the platform edge. Commuters with briefcases rushing as if missing this train meant missing their destiny. And in the middle of all that noise sat a man. Not a man most people noticed. His clothes were torn, his beard unkempt, his bowl chipped from years of use. To him, this little bowl wasn't just an object, it was his entire world. His survival depended on how many coins fell into it each day. He was known by one word. A beggar. For years, that's all he had been. He didn't dream anymore. He didn't hope anymore. He simply sat, lifted his bowl, and asked. Sometimes people gave. Sometimes they didn't. But his life was as predictable as the whistle of the train. Until that one day. A day that began like any other, sunlight streaming through the iron roof of the station, passengers spilling onto the platform, and him sitting with his familiar bowl. He scanned the crowd, eyes trained to identify targets, those who looked kind, those who looked hurried, and most importantly, those who looked rich. That's when he saw him. Tall. Well-dressed. A man who carried himself differently, with an air of someone used to making decisions, not requests. His shoes alone could have fed the beggar for a week. The beggar's heart leapt. This man will surely give me something good. He shuffled forward, bowl extended, voice rehearsed from years of practice. Please, sir. Spare some change. Anything you can give. The man stopped. Looked down at him. Not with disgust, not with pity, but with curiosity. His eyes seemed to pierce right through the layers of dirt and despair. Then he asked a question. A simple question. One that cracked the beggar's world wide open. You always ask from others. But tell me, have you ever given anything to anyone? The beggar froze. The station noise seemed to fade away. He blinked, not sure if he had heard correctly. Sir? I am just a beggar, he stammered. I have nothing. I can't give. That is why I asked. The tall man didn't flinch. His voice carried the weight of certainty. If you cannot give, then you have no right to ask. I am a businessman. I believe in give and take. If you give me something, only then will I give you something in return. And without another word, the man stepped onto the train, and the whistle blew. The doors closed. The train pulled away, leaving the beggar standing there, hand frozen in the air, bowl trembling. That single question hit him harder than hunger ever had. All night, he replayed it in his head. Have you ever given anything to anyone? He turned the words over like pebbles in his palm. He thought of every day he had begged, every coin he had received, every person he had approached. He realized he had never once thought of giving. Never once thought beyond his own empty stomach. Shame burned through him. Maybe that's why people avoid me. Maybe that's why they give me so little. Because I never give. But then another thought struck him, one that made him feel both angry and helpless. What do I even have to give? I am nothing. I own nothing. I am just a beggar. The question haunted him like a shadow. Days passed. He sat in his usual spot, bowl in hand, but something was different. His heart wasn't in the begging anymore. Each time he asked, the man's words rang in his ears. If you cannot give, you have no right to ask. On the second night, he barely slept. He tossed on the cold ground, staring at the station ceiling. The world seemed unfair. Why plant such a question in his mind, if there was no answer? By the third morning, he was restless. His body was tired, but his mind was burning. He sat on his usual bench, watching trains come and go, when suddenly a sweet fragrance drifted through the air. He turned his head. There, just beyond the edge of the platform, grew a patch of flowers. Small, simple, but alive with color. He had passed them hundreds of times, but never noticed them before. Something stirred inside him. What if I give flowers? It was so simple, it was almost laughable. He plucked a few, awkwardly held them, and boarded a train when it stopped. His heart hammered as he extended his bowl toward a passenger. "Please, sir, spare some change. And here, a flower for you." The passenger blinked in surprise, then smiled. He dropped a coin into the bowl and accepted the flower, holding it gently as though it mattered. The beggar's chest tightened. For the first time, he wasn't just taking. He was giving. And that small act changed everything. That day, he gave away flowers with every coin. He saw smiles he had never seen before. Some people tucked the flowers into their bags. A woman pinned one to her child's hair. A man placed one in his shirt pocket like a badge. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. For the first time, he felt human. That night, when he counted his coins, he realized something strange. He had received more than usual. Not because people felt pity, but because people felt appreciation. The tall man had been right. Give, and then you can take. But joy was followed by doubt. What happens when the flowers are gone? Then what will I give? Will I go back to being nothing? The next day, he rushed to the patch early. He carefully picked flowers, trying not to strip the plants bare. He gave again, and once again, people responded warmly. But when the flowers ran out halfway through the day, the magic seemed to vanish. His bowl grew lighter. His confidence faltered. That night, he lay awake with a new worry gnawing at him: sustainability. If giving was the secret, then he needed something he could give every single day. Something reliable. Something more than luck. The man's words weren't just about coins. They were about a law of life. A principle. A rhythm of the universe. Give first. Receive after. That thought broke him and built him at the same time. For the first time in his life, he wasn't asking, "How do I survive tomorrow?" He was asking, "How do I create something worth giving?" It was a terrifying shift. His identity, beggar, was cracking like old paint. Underneath, something new was trying to emerge, though he didn't yet know what to call it. But one thing was certain. He would never see himself the same way again. He remembered that tall man's voice, calm, confident, rooted in truth. The kind of voice only someone who truly believes in himself can have. The beggar wanted that. And though he didn't know it yet, this was the very first seed of his transformation. Not the flowers. Not the coins. But the realization that he had something to give all along. Because giving isn't about wealth. It's about will. It's about daring to believe that no matter how little you have, you can still create value. That question, "Have you ever given anything to anyone?" wasn't just a question. It was a mirror. And for the first time, the beggar saw not just a beggar, but a man capable of becoming more. He didn't know where this road would lead. But he knew this much: he could no longer sit with an empty bowl and an empty soul. Something had awakened. And it all began with a single question that broke the bowl. The sun was barely awake when he stepped onto the station platform. The beggar, though the word was beginning to feel less true, stood with purpose for the first time in years. His bowl was in his left hand. In his right, a small, trembling bouquet of flowers he had plucked from the station garden. They were nothing special by the world's standards. Not roses, not lilies, not orchids. Just tiny wild blooms. But to him, they were treasure. They were his answer to the question that had haunted him for days: what do I have to give? Today, he wasn't just going to ask. He was going to give. As the first train arrived, his heart hammered in his chest. The usual fear returned: what if people laughed? What if they mocked him for offering something so small? What if this giving idea was just foolishness? But fear or not, he stepped forward. "Please, sir," he said to a man stepping off the carriage. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "Spare some change. And here, a flower for you." The man paused, eyebrows raised. Passengers rarely expected dignity from beggars, and they never expected gifts. He looked at the beggar's dirt-streaked face, then at the trembling flower held out to him. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, dropped a coin into the bowl, and gently accepted the flower. He didn't just take it, he smiled. That smile hit the beggar like sunlight breaking through a storm. It was the first time in years someone hadn't looked at him with pity or disgust, but with gratitude. And so, he tried again. Another passenger. Another flower. Another coin. Another smile. By the end of that day, something had shifted. His earnings were higher than usual, but more than that, his spirit was higher than ever before. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a receiver. He was a giver. That night, as he counted the coins under a dim street lamp, he whispered to himself, "It works. People don't just want to give out of pity. They give because they receive." The businessman's words echoed in his mind, give, and then take. But along with hope came a new fear. What happens when the flowers are gone? The next morning, he rushed to the garden before the crowd arrived. His fingers shook as he picked fresh blooms. He was careful this time, choosing gently, trying not to strip the plants bare. He whispered apologies to the earth, almost as if the flowers could hear him. Again, he offered them to passengers. Again, smiles bloomed on faces. Again, the coins clinked into his bowl more generously than before. But halfway through the day, disaster struck. His flowers ran out. He stretched out his empty hand with the bowl, and something strange happened. People looked at him differently. Some avoided eye contact. Others shook their heads. A few gave reluctantly. The coins slowed to a trickle. His heart sank. He realized the truth. It wasn't him people valued. It was the flowers. When he had something to give, they gave with joy. When he didn't, they turned away. That night, lying on the station floor, he stared at the ceiling beams. The question gnawed at him. If giving is the secret, how do I give every day? How do I never run out? The next morning, he watched a boy buy tea from a vendor. The boy handed over coins, and in return, the vendor handed over steaming cups. Both smiled. Both gained something. The beggar realized with sudden clarity, this isn't just about flowers. This is about exchange. About creating value. For the first time, he wasn't thinking like a beggar at all. He was thinking like a businessman. Over the next few days, he developed a routine. He would rise before dawn, collect flowers carefully, and tie them into small bundles using discarded threads. Instead of just handing them randomly, he began to present them neatly, like gifts prepared with care. "Thank you, sir. Here's something for you. Madam, a flower for your day." He even began saying the words "thank you" with genuine warmth, a phrase he had almost forgotten existed. Something strange started happening. The more he gave, the more he was noticed. A child once squealed in delight when handed a flower and tucked it into her schoolbook. A young man pinned one to his jacket like a badge of honor. A weary mother sniffed a flower and sighed, as though it had lifted her whole morning. It wasn't about the flower itself. It was about what it represented: dignity, beauty, surprise, value. And the beggar realized something powerful. Giving transforms not just the receiver, but also the giver. But his journey wasn't without trials. One morning, as he bent to pluck flowers, a station guard shouted at, "Hey! Stop stealing from the garden." The beggar froze. Shame and fear flooded him. His only source of giving, about to be snatched away. "Sir, please," he pleaded. "I'm not stealing. I give these flowers to people who give me alms. It makes them happy. It helps me survive." The guard scoffed. "That's not your garden. You can't just take what doesn't belong to you." The beggar's mind raced. For the first time in his life, instead of bowing his head and apologizing, he thought like a negotiator. "What if," he said carefully, "I promise not to ruin the plants. I'll take only a few each day." and in return, I'll water them. I'll care for them. I'll make sure they bloom better than ever. The garden will grow, and I'll still have something to give. The guard studied him, surprised by the boldness. Finally, he shrugged. Fine. But one wrong move, and you're out. Relief washed over the beggar. He had not only protected his flowers, he had earned responsibility. For the first time, someone trusted him with something. Days became weeks. His reputation grew. People began to look for him on the platform, not to brush him aside, but to receive his little tokens of joy. He was no longer the beggar. To many, he was the flower man. But with growth came a new challenge. The demand was rising. More people wanted flowers than he could provide. And when he ran out, the coins slowed. The pattern repeated: value first, reward after. He realized the hard truth: generosity must be consistent, not occasional. To truly change his life, he couldn't just rely on chance patches of flowers. He had to create reliability. He had to scale. This was no longer about survival. It was about building. One evening, as he counted his coins, he whispered, "If I can make people happy with flowers I find, what if I buy flowers? What if I bring more, better, fresher ones? Then I can give to everyone, not just a few." The idea terrified him. Buying meant risk. What if he spent his little earnings and couldn't make it back? But another voice inside him said, "That's how businessmen think. They risk. They invest. They create more to give more." And so, the seed of his next transformation was planted. But before that future could bloom, something unexpected happened. One morning, while moving from carriage to carriage, he looked up and froze. There, seated by the window, was the tall, well-dressed man. The very same man whose words had shattered him weeks ago. The beggar's pulse quickened. He clutched his bowl, his flowers, his courage. The moment of truth had come. He approached slowly, heart pounding, and whispered, "Sir, do you remember me?" The man looked up, eyebrows raised. The beggar held out a small bundle of flowers. "Today, I have something to give you. Please, accept this, and in return, if you wish, give me alms." The man's lips curled into a smile. He reached into his pocket, placed money in the bowl, and accepted the flowers with grace. "Wonderful," he said softly. "You've become a businessman, like me." Those words echoed louder than the train whistle, louder than the station announcements. A businessman. Not a beggar. Not a thief. Not a burden. A businessman. The beggar's eyes burned with tears. He stepped off the train, looked up at the sky, and whispered fiercely, "I am not a beggar anymore. I am a businessman. And I can become rich." The people around him thought he was mad. But inside, he knew the truth. He had discovered the law of giving and receiving. He had found his dignity. He had touched the power of identity. And though he still had little in his hands, he now carried something far greater in his heart: belief. The word echoed in his ears long after the train had left the station. "You've become a businessman. Not a beggar. Not a burden. A businessman." The tall man's words wrapped around his heart like a protective cloak. For the first time in his life, he wasn't ashamed of what he was. He had a title. A new identity. And once a man changes how he sees himself, the world around him begins to change too. That night, he could not sleep. He tossed and turned on the hard station floor, staring up at the iron beams above. The station was loud as always, vendors packing up, dogs barking, trains screeching, but none of it mattered. His mind was ablaze. "If I am truly a businessman, then I must do more than survive. I must grow. I must expand. I must act." The next morning, he walked differently. His shoulders straightened. His bowl no longer felt like a symbol of shame, but like a cash box. His flowers no longer felt like scraps from the earth, but like products. His words no longer sounded like begging, but like service. And for the first time, he shouted it aloud in the open air. I am not a beggar anymore. I am a businessman. People turned, some chuckled, others shook their heads. To them, he looked no different, ragged clothes, tired eyes, dirt on his hands. But he didn't care. He had discovered the truth. Identity is not given by others, it is chosen within. His little flower for coin exchange grew quickly. Each day, more commuters looked for him. Some came out of habit, some out of joy, some because they simply liked the ritual of receiving something before starting their journey. But he soon faced a problem. His supply could not meet his demand. The flowers from the garden were not enough. Too often, he ran out, and when he did, the coins slowed. The lesson was clear: consistency creates trust. Without it, no business survives. So, he made a bold decision. For the first time in his life, he would invest. He took his earnings, small, precious, hard-earned, and went to the wholesale flower market on the edge of the city. The place overwhelmed him, baskets overflowing with roses, marigolds, jasmine, orchids. Colors and fragrances stronger than he had ever known. At first, the merchants laughed at him. What can you buy with those few coins? A single rose petal? But he didn't flinch. He placed his coins carefully and asked for a small bundle. Enough to last a morning. Enough to test his courage. When he returned to the station the next day with fresh roses and marigolds, commuters gasped. His flowers were brighter, richer, more fragrant. They were no longer weeds picked from the corner of a platform. They were products of value. His bowl filled faster than ever before. And with every coin that dropped, his conviction grew. But success is never without resistance. Other vendors at the station noticed him. One fruit seller sneered. You? Selling flowers now? You're just a beggar dressed in perfume. Another mocked. What will you do when people stop buying your pretty flowers? Go back to begging? Their words stung, but instead of shrinking, he smiled. For the first time, he understood something powerful. Ridicule is proof that you're moving forward. No one mocks a man standing still. And so, he pressed on. Yet, another challenge tested him soon after. Rain. One week, the skies opened, and the city drowned. Trains slowed, people rushed past with umbrellas, unwilling to pause for flowers. His roses wilted. His marigolds rotted. His investment washed away like the muddy water on the platform floor. For 2 days he barely earned enough to eat. Fear whispered, "Go back. Return to begging. Forget this madness of business." But his heart shouted louder, "No! I am not a beggar. I am a businessman. And businessmen don't quit when the skies turn dark. They adapt." He thought carefully. Rain or shine, people still traveled. What could he offer them that lasted? That endured through weather and circumstance? The idea came suddenly: smaller bouquets, wrapped in scraps of newspaper, protected from rain. Not just flowers, but journey bouquets, designed for commuters to carry easily. The first day he tried, people smiled. A mother bought one to cheer her crying child. A young man bought one for his sweetheart waiting at the next station. A tired worker bought one, saying, "This will make my wife smile when I get home." His bouquets sold out faster than ever before. He grew bolder. He experimented with words. "Pay what you value," he told customers. Some gave little, but many gave more. People weren't just buying flowers, they were paying for the meaning, for the story, for the man who had transformed himself from beggar to businessman. Slowly he saved. Slowly, his coins stacked higher. And one evening, after months of hard work, he counted enough to rent a small wooden pushcart. The next morning, the station saw a new sight. Not a beggar with a bowl, but a flower merchant with a cart. His bundles were arranged neatly, tied with care. His voice was no longer the cry of desperation, but the call of a vendor. Fresh flowers! Brighten your journey today. The same commuters who once ignored him now stopped with respect. The man they had pitied was now a man they admired. But destiny wasn't finished testing him. One day, as he arranged his flowers, a wealthy family approached him. They were traveling for a wedding and wanted to decorate their train coach. "Can you supply enough flowers?" they asked. The beggar, no, the businessman, swallowed hard. The order was bigger than anything he had ever handled. His coins were few. His resources were limited. Failure would mean not only shame but collapse. But something inside him whispered, "Say yes. You will figure it out." And so he smiled and said, "Yes. I can." That night he barely slept. He ran from market to market, negotiating, pleading, collecting every flower he could afford. At dawn, his pushcart overflowed. He delivered the flowers to the family, who paid him handsomely. The sight of that decorated train coach filled him with pride. It wasn't just about money, it was proof. Proof that he could dream bigger, supply bigger, be bigger. Standing on the platform that evening, watching the decorated train disappear into the horizon, he whispered to himself again, "I was never truly a beggar. I was always a businessman. I just didn't see it." The words were no longer wishful thinking. They were truth. Because business is not just about money. It is about mindset. About creating value where none seemed possible. About giving first, and trusting that the return will follow. The journey ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more failures, more risks. But the beggar had vanished. In his place stood a flower merchant with vision. And with each passing day, with each bouquet sold, with each smile given and received, he stepped further into his new identity. The identity of a businessman. 6 months had passed since the day he first shouted to the sky, "I am not a beggar anymore, I am a businessman." The railway station was still the same. The trains still screeched, the vendors still called out, the passengers still rushed in a blur. But he was not the same man anymore. The ragged beggar who once held a chipped bowl now stood with pride beside a sturdy wooden cart, neatly painted, wheels greased, stacked high with bundles of fresh flowers. A small sign hung from the cart, written in his own shaky hand. "Platform pedals, brighten your journey." No longer did he shuffle in shame. He walked tall, his clothes clean, his eyes shining with purpose. People didn't avert their gaze anymore. They sought him out, smiling, waving, greeting him like an old friend. Some bought flowers daily, not just for their fragrance, but because they felt connected to his journey. The beggar had vanished. The flower merchant had arrived. But success had not been simple. Each dawn, he rose before the city, walking miles to the wholesale market to buy flowers. He learned which blooms lasted longer, which colors sold better, how to bargain with wholesalers, how to manage weight. He experimented with wrapping, newspapers, banana leaves, scraps of cloth, to make his bouquets look more appealing. Slowly his earnings grew. And instead of hoarding them, he reinvested. More flowers, better arrangements, brighter displays. Business wasn't just a way to eat anymore, it was a way to create beauty, dignity, and opportunity. People noticed. The station master, once indifferent, now greeted him warmly. Commuters who once hurried past now slowed to chat. Children loved his stall. The station smelled faintly of marigolds and roses every morning. But the greatest transformation wasn't in the flowers or the coins. It was in him. He no longer thought, "Will I survive today?" He thought, "How can I grow tomorrow?" One crisp morning, as he arranged marigold garlands, he heard a familiar voice. "Do you recognize me?" He looked up and froze. Standing before him was the tall, well-dressed man, the very one whose question had broken his world months ago. The businessman who had once refused his bowl, then later accepted his flowers. For a moment, time froze. The crowd, the trains, the vendors, all faded into the background. Only these two men remained, the giver of the question, and the receiver who had turned it into a destiny. The flower merchant smiled. "Of course I recognize you." "Twice, in fact. The first time, you refused to give me anything. The second time, you gave me money in exchange for flour." The tall man studied him, confused. "But you're not the same. You were the beggar." "Yes," the flower merchant said proudly. "I was that beggar. But today I am not. Today, I am a flower merchant. Today, I run a business that feeds me, sustains me, and gives joy to others." The tall man's eyes widened in admiration. What happened? And so, on that busy platform, amid the noise of trains, the flower merchant told his story. He spoke of how the question had haunted him. How it had forced him to confront his own emptiness. How the sight of flowers had inspired him to give before asking. How people's smiles had fueled his courage. How every setback, the rain, the ridicule, the scarcity, had tested him but never broken him. He ended with the truth he had discovered. "You taught me the greatest rule of life: we only receive when we give. That rule has changed me forever. People never gave me alms, they paid for the flowers I offered. And with every coin, I invested back into giving more. Today, I run a flower business because I chose to believe I was more than a beggar. I chose to believe I was a businessman." The tall man smiled, nodding slowly. "You understood the law better than most. I gave you only words, but you gave them life. And look at you now." But the story didn't end with him. The flower merchant began to notice others, men and women sitting on the platform, bowls in hand, waiting for pity. They reminded him of who he had been, and he couldn't walk past them without feeling a pull in his heart. So, he began to share his lesson. He approached one beggar, placed a single flower in his hand, and said, "Don't just ask. Give. Even if it is small. Even if it is only a smile, a blessing, or this flower. Begin with giving, and life will return it to you." At first they laughed. They thought he had gone mad, just as people once thought of him. But when they saw his cart, his earnings, his clean clothes, their laughter softened into curiosity. Slowly, a few began to try. Some offered blessings, some shared small trinkets, some learned to help vendors in exchange for coins. The ripple had begun. His success wasn't just his anymore, it was becoming a light for others. One festival season, his biggest test arrived. Demand for flowers surged. Weddings, celebrations, rituals, everyone wanted flowers, and they were willing to pay high prices. Some merchants doubled their rates. Some even hoarded stock to create scarcity. The flower merchant's mind wrestled with temptation. He could charge more. He could profit greatly. He could finally secure comfort. But then he remembered the law, the principle that had lifted him from the ground: we receive only when we give. If he gouged now, he would betray the very foundation of his journey. So he made a decision. He kept his prices fair. And something magical happened. Word spread. People said, "The flower man at the station is honest. He doesn't cheat. He respects his customers." And while others sold less at inflated rates, his cart sold out every day. He earned not just money, but trust. And trust, he realized, is the highest currency a businessman can hold. Months later, an opportunity arrived that felt like destiny. A train company, impressed by his reputation, approached him with a proposal: supply flowers for their long-distance trains. His blooms would travel to new cities, reaching strangers far beyond the station he once called home. As he signed his first contract with trembling hands, he thought back to that first day, dirty, empty, hopeless, holding nothing but a chipped bowl. Now he held a pen, signing not for survival, but for expansion. The boy who once begged had become the man who built. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the station, he closed his cart for the day. A small boy approached him. Clothes ragged, bowl in hand, eyes hollow with the same hunger he once knew too well. the boy whispered. Please, sir, spare some change. The flower merchant knelt, looked into the boy's eyes, and placed the flower gently into his hand. Don't just ask, my boy, he said softly. Start by giving. Even if it is just this flower. When you give, the world gives back. The boy stared at the flower, puzzled, but a spark lit in his eyes. The same spark that had once been lit in him. And in that moment, the flower merchant understood, his journey had come full circle. The law of giving and receiving was not just his story, it was a story meant to be passed on, one life at a time. As the last train roared into the station, he stood tall, breathing in the scent of his flowers, the chatter of commuters, the clatter of coins. He was no longer defined by poverty. No longer limited by circumstance. No longer chained to the label of beggar. He was a businessman. A merchant. A giver. And through him, the platform itself had transformed, from a place of pity into a place of possibility. Because one man had dared to believe that even the smallest gift, a flower, could unlock the greatest wealth of all, dignity, hope, and a future.